Today I'm going to talk about pauldrons. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about these pauldrons, which are an early 15th century German design, very similar to those that are used by Italians and Flemish and just about anybody else out of that period. Although, I would have to point out that when it comes to European shoulder defenses, that would be a book all in itself to cover the entire history of European ways of taking care of the protection of this area of the body. I'm going to be using the terms the way Claude Blair does in his book on European armor, seeing as that is the book on European armor. He called these things pauldrons, very large, very protective, overlapping front and back defenses, as opposed to what he called a spodler, which was a much more limited protection for the point of the shoulder and the upper arm. Well, anyway, there's been some talk about how pauldrons are very restricted in their movement by a lot of people, and saying that and there's been a lot of claim that pauldrons don't really allow you to take some of the positions that we see in the fight manuals of the period. It is true that left pauldrons very frequently don't give quite as much mobility as the right pauldron. But I would contend that a lot of that is not of any great practical difference if you're right-handed in fighting with great weapons, or just fighting at all. Because typically the sorts of motions that the left shoulder are going to have to make are more restricted anyway when you're leading with the weapon out front, right hand forward. And even when you are doing something like leading with the butt spike forward with a poleaxe, once again, the kinds of motions that you're using, don't really demand a lot out of the left pauldron. You will notice, however, is that there are infantry pauldrons, particularly in the later 16th century and going into the 17th century. And those pauldrons tend to be very symmetrical. Unlike these. These, for instance, this has a cutout for the lance. This obviously doesn't need it. It needs to do more protecting. But the thing is, even when we allow for the sort of protection we want with the left pauldron, the amount of restriction that it actually inflicts upon us, particularly with this design, doesn't have to be very great at all. So anyway, show you first what this right one will do. It really doesn't restrict my motion to any great degree at all. What about the left pauldron? Well, not quite as good in this direction. Although, I suppose I should explain that this is a kludged together arrangement. I don't have a gorget at the moment that will fit me properly, or work properly with these pauldrons at the moment. And also, it'd be helpful to have the cuirass on, the breast and back plates on, which would help these pieces to work better, to flow around the surfaces better. Right now, they have a bad tendency to lock into the back of the gorget. Anyway, so, for instance, there's a complaint about people not being able to raise their arms. Well, depends on how badly or how close you want to get your arms. But I'm certainly capable of doing a full overhead strike wearing these pauldrons. And, once again, if I chose to do the hanging guard, the window guard, whatever you want to call it, they do just fine. Now, one thing you may be noticing is you're probably wondering if these things are choking me out when I do certain positions like this. Well, part of the thing that would help that is the fact that it's the gorget itself that is tending to push into my throat a little bit, but that's because it's not being held down by the breast and back plates. And it would be nice to have these lames here, because what would happen is when these things would rush up into or push up into my neck, and they're not really pushing, really. It's more gravity feed than anything else. I'll show you in a second here. Anyway, basically, this would run into the gorget, and I wouldn't feel much of anything at all. Probably nothing. Particularly when you consider that, let's say I put my fingers right about here. Okay, I'm going to hold the pauldron, keep it away from my neck. You see what's going on here? It's not getting anywhere close to me even now. And we can even push it up further than that. So basically, it's gravity is all we're seeing there. And it's hung up at the back of the door. Okay. Anyway, this one may look like it's doing a much fiercer job of jamming itself into my throat. But once again, I will show you it's not doing anything of the kind. Okay. So, anyway, there are pauldrons and there are pauldrons. And some of them are more restrictive depending upon their use and some less so. And particularly when we get into tournament pauldrons. Tournament pauldrons, once again, is a very complex subject. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that they're doing. And very odd articulation schemes, and depending upon exactly what they wanted for a particular event. So anyway, that is, what is that thing, that program they have on television? My brief and spectacular and glorious take on early 16th century German pauldrons.